In the riparian rehabilitation project, we are investing in ecological infrastructure by removing stands of invasive alien trees and then replacing these with active rehabilitation, which is the planting of locally sourced indigenous species into that zone. This brief talk, run by myself, Phil McLean, and narrated also by Johan van Biljon of Intaba, will run you through exactly what is going on the ground. Here we have a fairly dense stand of pre-clearing, mostly eucalypt and some wattle. It's quite impressive to see just how big these trees can get when they're stealing water from the Berg River. I want to draw your attention to the distinct lack of understory in this space. That these trees have outcompeted whatever was here before and have ended up with quite a high canopy monoculture, which begs the question, if you were to just fell these trees and rely on successional rehabilitation, you've got a bit of a lucky dip. You don't know what's going to come back and how badly the understory and seed bank have been affected. More than likely you're going to get the original invader coming back to haunt you. As we move into the site that's been recently cleared, you will notice already that there are some patches of wetness, which could be a tributary or even a secondary channel that's here hiding amongst the dense infestation. As we move through into the site that's already been cleared, I just want you to have a look at the size of these trees and the amount of biomass that's being removed in this area. Have a look at this wattle stump. One of the important aspects of this kind of clearing and rehabilitation is we're allowed to be somewhat adaptive. You'll see here several of the taller eucalypts have been ring-barked. That allows the tree to die standing, which provides some high canopy habitat for raptors and other birds. And it gives it some structural height in the landscape, and also in this case protects the neighbor from the immediate view of the highway while the understory cures. And now we are going to quickly whip through the rest of this clearing section, just to draw your attention again to the level of biomass. Some of it is still standing, but also some of which is already felled and lying on the ground ready to be burned or taken away for fuel. Those of you who know me, this is going quite fast, but you'll be well aware that I'm not a runner, so this is just a sped up version. I've paused us here briefly just to discuss some of the other deleterious effects that invasive alien trees have on rivers, particularly here in the Western Cape. We saw earlier in that clip under the euc canopy how they have a serious impact on the flora and the plants that can grow underneath their canopy, but they also change the hydrology and the way that rivers work. Here we can see two examples. The one is where the trunks themselves force the river into narrow channels. So instead of high flow or flooding, where the river spills its banks and flows quite broadly through the catchment and even forms secondary channels or braiding, the trees themselves force the river into channels, which then incise. In other words, they cut down, erode downwards, and make deeply incised channels. The second effect is here. You'll see the highlighted circle on the top right there. That should be the entrance to a secondary channel. What's happened is that some of the eucalypts are famous for self-pruning, so they've dropped branches, and some of that biomass, the branches and all that, have gathered to block that secondary channel. So when there was high flow in the recent rains, that secondary channel, instead of absorbing that extra water, blocked it, forcing the water around through the main channel, which has caused significant incising into the bank. You can see on the left hand side, as that force of water now unimpeded rushes straight at a tall embankment, it just chops away that soil and leaves a very stark an unecological entrance to the river on that side. Now we're going to take you through a rather haphazard transect, if you like, from a densely invaded patch that hasn't been cleared yet through a cleared and rehabilitated patch all the way down to the main channel of the river. What we're walking through now is what Johan would describe as a lucky packet. Notice quite a few invasive species here, mainly dominated by Port Jackson and wattle, but there are also eucalypt and some other funky things in here. So we now exit the wall of invasives on our left. And we look over a section now that would have looked exactly like that about a year ago now, which is first of all just felled, and secondly is receiving some of this active rehabilitation. As we walk here, you'll notice some of the poles that indicate where plants are in this landscape, and you'll see these little dams where little clusters, communities of plants have been inserted. We'll come back to that a little bit later in the video. Here's a nice little path that's been constructed. Also, we'll revisit that a little bit later. But I just want to draw your attention to some of the previous piles of biomass which have been burnt. Johan and the team then water this down so that it provides some biochar, some charcoal material that they are then able to use in some of these rehab sites. Notice here the grass is flattened for quite a way past the channel. So the recent high flow has washed right over this area, but even here the recent plantings have retained their footing, and they are still quite happy to be here, which just shows how much the force of the water is dissipated when it's allowed to spread laterally. There you'll see on the left of the screen some of the biomass blockage which caused the secondary channel to block up and caused the erosion we saw previously. As we walk away from the main channel now, you'll notice we're about to go up a small embankment, and we'll reveal what should or could be a secondary channel. Had it not been blocked by all these this area would have received those high flood waters and allowed much more dissipation of that force and a natural infiltration into the landscape of that water. This pretty little Senecio starts us off on a rapid trip down the pathway that's been constructed. Again, this is sped up for the sake of shortening the video, not because I'm a runner. Tell me, Johan, what's in these holes?
Okay, so here we've got the research sections at Cape Kairos. So inside this little pond we've got various things. So we've got your more climax stuff like your yellowwood here, with the Carpus elongatus and the wild olive, Lea. And then we've got a shrub component, which is there. There's a Tibos, the Circia undulata, and the camera is going berserk. One, brother, for me. Okay, whatever, that one there. So here we've got the Dordonia, Osteospermum, Dordonia, Ortholobium, which is the nitrogen fixing ones, and Melianthus there for the sunbirds, and the Leonotus for the sunbirds. And the soil has been, we've added compost and activated charcoal in here. So the compost we mixed in with the charcoal with some extra nitrogen so we can get the carbon nitrogen level right. And then we've got this ponds, and the idea is to water the ponds every second week or so in the first summer, just to keep the plants alive. And they are marked with these pegs. See, these wooden pegs, and then we can see who they are and where they are, because they do vanish. It doesn't look like it can vanish now, but they do vanish.
Just imagine how pretty this is going to look in a couple of years when all these planting sites have grown up and mature. You're going to have to go a little bit more slowly than I've done in this video, because I think you'll want to sit back and appreciate all the bird song and the noises of frogs and other wildlife that will be attracted to this area. So it's not just about planting in a fire and forget kind of a manner. There is also some research going on in the methodologies of this active rehabilitation. Johan is going to walk us through just what's going on with this research right now.
This is part of the research ones. So you'll see this one's got all flags, and some of them has got white insulation tape marked. So some of them we're going to water, and some of we're not going to water. And just to see what the difference is, and see how much does the charcoal actually makes a difference, or how much is the watering making the difference. And some of the holes on that side, I didn't show you now, we've added the insects, the microorganisms, the springtails and whatever we got with our lucky packet of a collection. And then we'll just see, and the idea is then to get Shalene to come and to monitor it. Show us how to do the traps, or if we can do it ourselves, I suppose. And then just count the insects, and we can see, hey, the insect populations are, the microorganism populations are increasing or decreasing. And then we can also see what's the difference, if the microorganisms, are they playing a role as well? Because I'm sure they are. I'm 100% sure they are. But I can't prove it yet. Because often there's a bacteria dominated and fungal dominated. And the one that gives advantage to shrubs, and the one gives advantage to grasses. So we want it more to be for the shrubs.
Just a note here on we're about to cross the fence line. You must remember most or all of these sites are on active agricultural land. So we need some way of keeping the unwanted ungulates out of our freshly planted rehab section. I'm sure horseback riding will be a pleasure here once they're established, but for now we need less predation. Okay, here we have a machine that is enabled to turn biomass into biochar. This is where some of the magic happens. Under this contract, Java Environmental Services have to provide 120,000 seedlings or saplings into rehab sites in an annual cycle. So this is where Johan and Georgina and the team set about working the plants for next year's plantings. Here's some wild almonds almost ready to go in. Just look at all these wonderful indigenous saplings ready to go in the ground. These guys are going to give those invasive recruits some competition, and we're going to make sure these guys are the winners. Thank you so much for coming along on this virtual field trip through one of our rehab sites and through the nursery and seeing what we're doing to invest in ecological infrastructure on our rivers in the Western Cape. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please check yourself for ticks.